This video is a few days late because Montgomery County, while putting in a brand new sewer line, also took out the telephone pole that brought me my wonderful internet. This kept me from recording the Fatal video and the Eurosource Plus video. Time to play catch up, though Fatal is going to take a few more days because I'm not recording that video with the kiddo here. But welcome to Night City, as this week we are going abroad to see how the Europeans are living it up. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we are hopping the pond to look at Eurosource Plus. Eurosource Plus was written in 1995 by Jose Ramos, Flo Merckx, and Steve Gill, with Jorge Parente Studio credited for the cover art. The book is a direct upgrade from the 2013 source book, Eurosource, with a lot more material added and the timeline advanced. So if you have Plus, you don't need the Eurosource book. It even says that on the cover. Everything is either repeated or updated to make the older book superfluous. It was one of the few update books that made the previous book useless, with the other obvious time this happened being Deep Space completely replacing Near Orbit. Europe 2020 is doing much better than the US by a large measure, depending on which part of Europe you're in. To quickly summarize, assume everything the Brexiteers accused Europe of being during the first election, and you won't be that far off. Germany, Belgium, and France control the EU with an iron grip. Britain has gone off on its own, though to be fair, Britain in 2020 doesn't resemble anything close to modern-day Britain. And the rest of the continent is either being used or controlled by the EU, spiraling out of control, or still under the influence of the still-kicking USSR. All political power is tightly held onto by the powerful German, French, and Belgians, and every other nation either has to toe the line or get their funding cut off. By toe the line, I mean give those three everything they want in terms of trading or employment needs. Britain in the book is a strange case, and I'm not going to cover it too much in detail because of the unusual situation. Britain underwent a second revolution and kicked out the royal family to be replaced by a military dictatorship. That part of the setting is covered in this book, but the story doesn't end there because in Rough Guide to the UK it describes how the Brits throw off that dictatorship and restore the monarchy to its rightful place, and Britain once again sings God Save the Queen. The problem is Rough Guide to the UK came out in 94, while Eurosource Plus, like I said, arrived in 95. So the more updated and expansive book came out earlier than the book that in the timeline predates it in some twisted, timey-wimey way. Germany by far is the most powerful European nation, both militarily and economically. It happened almost by accident, as the plague that wiped out large chunks of the world managed to remove Germany's welfare burden by killing off most of their elderly, leaving the nation financially well off. Germany hosts a large number of the corporations that run not only Europe but parts of the world, giving them almost superpower status. Germany is mostly merged with the megacorps. The corporations hold drafts of upcoming students the same way sports teams draft new recruits. The Germans are favorable to the corporations, and at the same time, the corporations are smart enough not to bite the hand that feeds them. If Germany is the muscle of the EU, France serves as the soul. France has the largest population in Europe and is still fertile compared to other nations. It's known for its devotion to the arts. With its wealth, agricultural, and large population, its only real rival in the European Union is Germany. Fortunately for them, they're happy to split the running of the Union between them. France is still France, and the people are laid back compared to the hard-working Germans. French love their wine and their art, and they don't try to work themselves to death. In the shadows, they do control parts of the EU and use this power to prevent other nations from rising in either military or economic power, by force if necessary. The rest of Europe is divided into southern, central, and the margins. The rest of Western Europe is divided between Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The Dutch have become even more stereotypical, with their nation legalizing most drugs, giving them an economic boost as the go-to nation for overworked corporate types to unwind in. Belgium serves as the brains of the EU, with the headquarters of the agency located in Brussels. While Belgium doesn't have the money or population to vie with Germany or France for control, instead their enormous amount of bureaucrats give the nation disproportionate powers over the rest of Europe. The southern parts of Europe are Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. They serve the rest of the EU by providing population in exchange for political and economic favors. The EU thanks them for their help, but does keep the nations poor and under the control of the Western nations. Spain tries to play France and Germany against each other, but doesn't understand how little both nations consider the worth of Spain. Portugal is the largest pure socialist government, though anyone who disagrees with their government gets re-educated for the good of all. Italy is partially controlled by the mob and survives through handouts by the EU. Greece is the worst off of all the EU nations in the south, being quite broke with little offer of help except for selling off parts of the nation for tourism or sending off large chunks of its population to work for the megacorps. The biggest change in 2020 is the Soviet Union didn't die off. Instead of a sudden and complete collapse, it's slowly bleeding out because of the lack of capital. Instead of fragmenting, the nation sold off large chunks of itself to Sov Oil, one of the largest megacorps in the world. Russia is almost fully owned by Sov Oil, and its decisions at the highest level are just dictated by Sov Oil's board of directors. While Russia is being held together by the corpus dollars, the rest of the Eastern Bloc costs more than Sov Oil was willing to spend. Poland personifies the difficult times for the Eastern European nations. It's trying to go its own way, of getting away from the influences of Russia and Germany. The nation is poor but proud. It doesn't go to the EU or the Sov bloc for help, preferring to do it themselves. The nation is plagued by large areas infiltrated by organized crime, and taking back those parts of the economy from the mafia is one of the bigger goals for the Poles. The rest of Eastern Europe has largely devolved into numerous dictatorships. The Balkans had their secessionary wars that tore apart Yugoslavia just like real life. The nations that make up the Balkans still hate each other, and wars flare up constantly. Other nations have turned into dictatorships that include Hungary, Romania, and most of Central Asia. The Czech Republic escaped all of this and started to become an economic powerhouse in its own right, though the EU is doing its best to scuttle the Czech economy before they can rise in power to challenge them. The Scandinavian nations survived the fall better than most countries and have maintained a strong cultural identity despite the efforts of the EU. Nordic technology is known for being some of the best in Europe, and their economy and infrastructure dwarf that of other nations. If you want to get cyber with no humanity costs, you have to head to Sweden. Europe is vastly different from the US when it comes to cyberpunk. Europe might have its bad zones, but at the same time, there's no combat zones in most nations. The continent didn't suffer the same collapse as the US did, so there's no real dead zones. This changed the roles of the characters in Europe. Subtle is better. Stealth is key. Nobody kicks in the door in France guns blazing. It's less cyberpunk and more spy game in Europe. That's Eurosource Plus. It's got page after page of source material. The adventures there are going to be less guns and more social, something that you have to ease your players into. It is odd that it echoed what happened to many of the countries today, yet missed out on the fall of the Soviet Union. Next week I'm going to look at Rough Guide to the UK to get you all that information up to date on the United Kingdom. So I'll catch you next week, assuming they don't cut off my cable line again.